Alrighty, we are going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our Working with Animals career chat. Welcome to our guests, Gianna, Sammy, and Amanda. Thank you for being here. I will stop sharing my screen and we will get started. So give me 1 second. I am going to share the bios of each of our guests to tell you a little bit more about what they do in their field and to help frame the conversation. And then I think Sammy is just going to share their own personal bio, so we can go ahead and get started. First, we have Amanda. Amanda is a veterinary technician and educator. She's from Whitehaven, Pennsylvania, is a certified veterinary technician, which is a CVT, a full-time instructor at Johnson College in Scranton, PA. She's also an alumni from Johnson College's Veterinary Technology Department in 2009, and she's currently looking into getting her bachelor's degree. She has experience in emergency, ICU, referral, and day practice. So welcome, Amanda. We have Gianna Ross, who is a learning and engagement specialist at the Philadelphia Zoo. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Gianna grew up going to the zoo and falling in love with every animal she saw. Originally going to school for art, Gianna went to Tyler School of Art, Temple University, and ended up with a Bachelor's of Art in Anthropology and Art History. Interning at the zoo during her senior year of college changed her perception of being able to work at a zoo, which was always a dream but didn't seem possible. After working as a seasonal staff member at the Philadelphia Zoo for 2 years, as well as the Academy of Natural Sciences, the University of Pennsylvania Anthropology and Archaeology Museum, and the Museum of the American Revolution, that's a lot of stuff all at once, Gianna received her master's degree in museum studies and gained a full-time position at the Philadelphia Zoo, running their outreach programs and training staff and ambassador animals. And Sammy, do you want to share your background?
Hi, so I've been employed at the York County SPCA for almost 7 years. I'm the behavioral assessment technician as well as the rescue coordinator. So I coordinate all of our rescue partnering as far as Canada basically, which is really cool. I also do safety protocols that are out of the ASPCA SAFER program, and that's how we do our assessments here at the shelter, myself along with another dog trainer. I do behavioral training where I go out to people's homes and I help basically maintain any kind of behavioral issues and do in-house training with dogs here and dogs that were adopted as well.
Awesome, thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
So the first question that I have is if each of you can talk a little bit about what the hours of your job are and then kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis. And Sammy, you kind of already got into that a little bit, so do you want to go first?
Yes, that's fine. So typically I work Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from 6 to 4:30, unless I have other appointments or schedules that I obviously have to like come in later or, whatever. I do my in-house training, which right now I'm not doing due to COVID. So once that passes, it typically is on the weekend where I'll go to people's homes, myself and another dog trainer. That way there's 2 people in case there was a safety issue. I'm also a euthanasia technician as well. We are an open admission shelter, which means that we never turn any animals away. We go from getting fish to farm animals to livestock to birds, pigs. It's pretty cool. I've worked here and I've seen as much as like alligators be brought in for service animals, which was really cool. Yeah, so basically if we're having any kind of issues in the kennel, I work with those dogs in in-depth training. I also do the safety protocols here with the volunteers as well. So my network is very broad, not only with the adopters, but the staff and the volunteers as well.
Awesome. And are the hours pretty standard, what your hours are for that kind of work that you do?
So I chose my schedule from 6 to 4:30 because I like to come in earlier when there's nobody else here, because typically the rest of the staff comes in at 8, so I have a complete silent room to do any evaluation so the dogs aren't distracted. Um, and then throughout the day, I may have just appointments like, dog introductions, or have some training that I need to do, or have adopters come back in and do follow-up appointments. So it kind of varies, and I basically make my own schedule and work around other people the best I can.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Gianna, do you want to answer the question next?
Sure. So I have a pretty interesting schedule because we're a zoo and we're open every day. We all have a scattered schedule. So even when you're full-time staff, pretty much everyone works one weekend day. So my usual schedule is Tuesday through Saturday. Right now, because of all of the fun stuff that's going on, I'm actually Monday through Friday, which is really nice. It's the first time I've had weekends in a very long time. But my average schedule is a Tuesday through Saturday. Because I run outreach, typically I come in around 8 a.m. And I'll work until 5:30. But if there is an outreach program where I have to be somewhere earlier, then I can come in earlier. There's been days I'm here at 4 a.m. and it's dark and I'm alone and I'm packing animals. And then we have, of course, night events typically in the summer during a normal summer. So we might be here till 11 or 12 at night. But for the most part, I have a pretty average schedule. Right now, I'm actually helping out with our keeper staff. So my schedule is a little more normal. And it's like a 8:15 to 5:15, which is, again, nice to have a normal schedule for a little bit. But on average, everyone at the zoo has a somewhat standard schedule. We're just a little different in education.
Awesome, thank you. Amanda, do you want to tell us about your work schedule and your day-to-day work?
Sure. I guess I'll probably focus more on the technician aspect rather than the teaching for right now, because typically you have to have, at least where I am, 4 years of experience in the field before you could get into teaching and different things like that. So the schedule can be a little tricky for even if you're first out into the field. Small practice that could go anywhere from, say, 7 in the morning till 6 or 7 at night, plus if there's any emergency walk-ins or running behind. The other, let's say, like emergency critical care, you could be looking, Monday all the way, Sundays, weekends, 24 hours, graveyard shift, day shift, mid shift, on-call schedules. And then referral hospitals would be like internal medicine for ongoing diseases. Say your dog needs knee surgery, so like a surgical referral center. But really with day practices, it's business hours that are established by that in particular business, and whether or not they take walk-ins and things like that. So yeah, it could get a little crazy, but everyone seems to find their fit. I like when I worked at the emergency hospital, I loved the overnight. It was great. But now I'm back teaching, maybe like I get there around 8 and then I'll leave at 5, but that's just that scenario.
Thank you, guys. So we have a question from Anonymous, who would like to know, how do you deal with animals that are stubborn, not disobedient, or shy? So Sammy, why don't you go first?
Okay, so basically, with kennel dogs, a lot of times if they're here for a long period of time, they may start like leash grabbing out of frustration and try to play. So a lot of behavioral issues, obviously, that we do tend to see a lot is like leash grabbing. So we actually came up with this cool idea of like a PVC pipe, so it slides right down on the leash, so then they can't grab the hard plastic, which will help them either better have better leash etiquette, or we can use like prong collars. And also you may not want to use one of those until you're actually familiar and trained on how to properly use it. A lot of people think they're like barbaric, but they're wonderful. I'm a huge fan of them. And then we have other things such as harnesses. So we go above and beyond to make sure the dog's comfortable. So that's like probably like one of the worst things we have to deal with is like leash grabbing. And then we have like different groups of volunteers. So we will let more senior experienced volunteers walk them, because when you have a 60-plus-pound dog going up the leash at times, it's very difficult and they're very strong. So we just want to make sure everybody's safe and properly educated on how to work with those particular animals.
Yeah, thank you. Gianna, how do you deal with it?
So we have a very large collection of animals that are all different. So one of the things that is the most fun is getting to know all of those animals and their specific personalities, and kind of how to work around that, especially because when I'm out on program, some of our animals have behaviors that we'll ask them to do. And a lot of times if they just don't feel like it that day, you can't say force a porcupine to do anything. It's a porcupine, so it's going to do what it wants. So we use a lot of reinforcement training, all positive reinforcement. We use food, big motivator, food. But for instance, something like a rabbit, our rabbits in particular are not very food motivated. So it's kind of like they're either going to do it or they're not, and that's just it. So for us, it's more so making sure that we're saying the right things when the animal is doing whatever it feels like doing when we're out, and surrounded by a bunch of people that this is not what they do every day. So they might not understand what I'm trying to do as an animal is just like, I don't feel like going back home right now and I want to stay out here for 30 minutes. Okay, well, it looks like I'm going to be talking for 30 minutes. And so it's a lot of us really getting to know the animals and what's going to work and what doesn't work. We try and have pretty nice training regimens with our animals so that happens not so often. But for the most part, they're pretty good. It is a thing that happens to have an animal that does not want to do what it is supposed to do. But that's why we just kind of get good at explaining that. And, you know, it's just like a human. We don't always want to do what we have to do. So what's going to be that motivator for that animal? So, you know, it might be food. It might be a scratch here and there. It might just be, okay, you can go home now. So for a lot of it, it's figuring out what that animal needs, what it wants, and how we interact with it to get it to that point. So for me, it's a little different because our animals kind of stay and we get to know them for a very long period of time. And sometimes they're just tired and they don't want to anymore. And they're like, I want to stay sleeping in my carrier. And you know what, that's fine. We'll let them do that because we don't want to force them to do something they don't want to. But a lot of times it's food that's a great motivator for our animals, or something tactile or that they want to play with. So we kind of give them a positive for doing what we've asked them to do, versus doing anything negative for not doing what we've asked them to do.
Awesome, thanks. Amanda, do you want to share how you deal with stubborn, disobedient, and shy animals?
Sure. A lot of it, I guess I'll start is as a veterinary technician, you work under a veterinarian. So veterinarians may have different ways that they're used to, or based on past experiences, the type of restraint techniques that they either are okay with or they want their hospital to run under. That being said, there is a new program in the field, in the veterinary field, called Fear Free, and it's a training kind of to get away from some of the historical restraint techniques, especially when it comes to kitties. Kitties, they're their own little wild beasts, but they can be talked out of a situation if you know how to talk to them right. But for the most part, there are basic restraint techniques that, you know, we will teach the students. And then what we do is we alter them to that specific animal. You know, we really don't want to make the appointment, you know, that they're in for super stressful. We want them to come in, we want them to like us. So we try everything we can to make them comfortable. You know, treats are always a good thing, positive reinforcement. But yeah, for the most part, if an animal is really giving us a hard time and say something absolutely has to be done for their health, there is sedation, and, you know, there are some other type of techniques and methods that we could use to get done, you know, what's medically necessary. But most of the doctors that I've worked with, if an animal is way too stressed, they're going to say, you know what, let's do it another day. Or if it's something urgent, they'll say, we'll have to go with sedation. So.
Yeah, sounds like you kind of have options there.
A lot of options, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So now I would love for each of you to speak about your favorite part of your job, and then also the most difficult or the worst part of your job. Let's go in reverse order. So Amanda, do you want to start off?
Sure. So of course, the best part of my job is working with the animals. You know, I think that's a given. The best part of my job now, being an instructor, is being the person to be a mentor, be a coach, be, you know, just kind of guidance to help these students get to where they want to be as a veterinary technician. But as a vet tech, you know, just the interaction with the animals, being in small practice, you became very familiar with the patients. There were some that would come in every week, or there were some that, you know, you saw them as puppies and now they're 5 years old. And then you actually, you know, start to develop relationships with the owners. And that's in a day practice. As far as like emergency critical care, it is very rewarding when things, you know, go well, because unfortunately that'll be part of the more sad parts of the occupation later on. But the ones that do well, I mean, it's great when you get to spend time in an animal, you know, giving them their treatments, making them feel comfortable, just taking them out to the bathroom, you know, and then you see them go from absolutely on death's door to, you know, walking out with their family. So there is a lot, you know, a whole lot of good things that can happen. But on the downside, one of the major things, and I think the other girls can relate, is, you know, euthanasia. Now I know myself have grown to accept it for the best of the animal. You know, if an animal is very sick, and, you know, it's their time, there are ways to help cope, and you are also a support system for that owner. You know, and they really appreciate that. So you can get satisfaction and feel good that you helped relieve this animal of pain, and then also help support owners in that time.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And Sammy, I know you mentioned that you are a euthanasia technician. So do you want to talk a little bit about, maybe touch on that, and then maybe talk about the best and worst parts of your job, whether or not those are related or
So I've obviously, with me being the rescue coordinator and the behavioral assessment technician, I also make all the surrender appointments for all the dogs that come into the building. So basically I'm the front lineman for them to come in and to see them go out. So sometimes it's very emotional for me because I work with these dogs the most out of everybody that's here. And then if there's like a behavioral or health issue, like Amanda was saying, euthanasia is definitely very difficult, but it's done very humanely. Everybody, you know, like we do, it's kind of like a bittersweet thing. So, you know, we go and get them cheeseburgers and like just make their last day the best as possible. So that's definitely obviously the worst part of my job too. And working in this field, I'm sure Gianna and Amanda can relate, you know, compassion fatigue is a real thing. But the best part of my job is that I also do all the enrichment here for the dogs, and we have cool stuff like baby pools. We have little ball pits. We'll do like throw treats in for them and do like find it games. And we have agility hoops and like, courses and stuff like that. We also have a program called the Dogs Day Out where volunteers can come in, take them out for the day, get them ice cream, do like trail walking. Now with COVID and everything that's going on, that's kind of been laid back a little bit, but it's nice because currently we only have 17 dogs instead of almost 110. So everybody's been getting out more than probably 4 or 5 times a day and getting extra enrichment. We also do pup cups. I make frozen yogurt treats for them twice a week. So we definitely go above and beyond. So that's the best part of my job.
Yeah, that sounds really fulfilling.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah, Gianna, do you want to talk about the best and worst parts of your job?
Sure. So since I have such a unique job, I'd say there's probably a couple best parts and a couple worst parts. I think one of the best parts is definitely that relationship that I get to build with the animals, but also the vice versa. Kind of knowing that they know who I am is really, really nice, because at least it shows me that they do trust me as someone that is taking them off grounds away from their home and surrounding them with other people. So that's really nice to know that they do trust me, and that they know I'm going to bring them back home safe and I'm going to feed them and make sure they're okay. The other best part is definitely seeing people's reactions to when I do bring out an animal, then it's something they've never seen before and I can talk about it and hopefully open their minds to seeing different animals that are around in the world and that need their help. So I think definitely kind of that glint in people's eyes when I'm talking about something that's an extraordinary animal is really great. For the worst parts of the job, definitely losing an animal is hard. We work with them every day and get to have relationships with them and feed them and bring them places, and it's very hard when we do have to lose one. Currently our collection is very old, so we're kind of losing them a little more than usual in pace, which is very hard on all of us. I work very closely with the keepers, so for me it's the same kind of sadness that comes because I do work with training them, so I'm with them the same amount of time and making sure that they are connected to me. So it's very difficult. But I think the other worst part is when I'm off grounds with animals and I get covered in poop, because then I have to just bear with it until I get back to zoo grounds. And if it's a 2-hour drive, then it is a really long, smelly 2-hour drive, and it can be pretty bad, especially when you have a vulture throwing up in your car. It's pretty gross.
Yeah, that sounds gross. Thank you. So I think the next question is if each of you could speak to the education that you have and then the education that's required to work in the position you have in your field generally, and kind of, we love to touch on alternative pathways to get to a certain position. So, maybe opportunities just out of high school if you don't want to go to college, or opportunities if you don't want a bachelor's degree and just want to go to technical school. So Amanda, do you want to lead off?
Sure. So my story, pretty much, I graduated high school in 2006. I went to community college for a year to get like my gen eds done, which I highly recommend if you are planning on going on this track, because then you'll just be in pure mode for animals, veterinary related information. But I mean, you can always do all your gen eds at the college or program you're a part of. But then after that, I started at Johnson College in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 2007. It's a 2-year associate's degree. I graduated in 2009. Then pretty much after that, I went into practice. And then, after all those places I was at, I decided I wanted to settle down and start teaching. It being a technical school, my certification and my degree was enough to teach in my school that I'm in right now. But that's not to say that it would be for every type of veterinary technician college. But I could, I plan on advancing for a bachelor's in my degree. And another thing too, an alternate way that you could get into the field, except I'm not really sure how much longer it's going to be available, at least in Pennsylvania, is on the job training. You can start out as, say, a kennel assistant, work your way up to a assistant, work your way up to a technician that would not be certified because they would not be eligible to take their licensure for boards. So right now in Pennsylvania, you do not have to be licensed to be a technician. However, in the near future, there is some progress coming to where you do need to go to school and be board certified, almost like an RN or anything else in the medical field.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Gianna, do you want to talk a little bit about your education and then the education that's required to work at a zoo in your field specifically?
Sure. So my education is a master's in museum studies. So I never really kind of thought that I'd end up at a zoo. So my pathway here was a little different than most of my coworkers. I always kind of thought that I'd end up at an anthropology museum. That's what my background is in. So somehow I ended up here, which I love, I do. But having a master's at my level of where I am is actually pretty high for what I'm doing. It's not required of me. It's just what I wanted to do personally. So I'm happy that I have it, but it doesn't completely cross over 100% into what I'm doing specifically, especially because I focus a lot on animal behavior and education. And so the kind of interesting thing about education at a zoo is that you don't need to have an education background to be on an education team. So out of the 6 of us that are full-time in our education team, there's only one that actually has a background in childhood education. The rest of us are some sort of conservation science, wildlife, environmental science. Our one manager has a master's in math. So we're all very different in our backgrounds. But for what we're doing, a bachelor's is pretty much required. However, we do have certain programs for high school students to come in and work with our keeper staff, work with our education staff and our guest relations staff so they can see what it is that we do. And of course, there are other positions around the zoo that you can get without having a bachelor's or a master's. But for the animal side of things, at this point, they're going away from people without a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree, just because we're kind of changing how we train and train the animals and people. So they're looking more for people with an animal science background. So my number one thing to everyone is to, look for volunteer opportunities and internships, because it's really about the experience that you get, more so than the schooling, especially in the animal world. It's much better to have experience and understand animals and behavior than it is to say that you've just sat through classes about it. The experience definitely changes that. So there used to be a group of people that would come just from even 8th grade and become keepers. We called them foremans, and we actually just had our last one retire this year. She worked with us for about 40 years, so she was here for a very long time. And just finally retired, but she was great. She headed a conservation breeding program for Haitian frogs. So even if you don't want degrees, you can still do amazing work. It's really, again, about that experience that you get kind of before realizing like, hey, I might want to do that. Experience is everything in the zoo world.
Awesome, thank you, Gianna. Sandy, do you want to talk a little bit about your education and the education that's required to do the work that you do?
So I'm gonna basically agree with the other two ladies right now, like, we don't require education or a high level through college. Basically they can graduate if they have their diploma, they can come in for, you know, animal care technician working. Like, we have cats, we have small animals, and then we also have kennel technicians that, you know, clean around the dogs and help with the animals. But when you get on our high mass spay and neuter clinic, which is connected to our building, we have veterinary technicians, and then we have doctors over there as well. So obviously the education level gets higher depending on what you want or apply yourself to have. I'm certified in euthanasia. We run the SAFER program, and I was actually in the course of proceeding with some kind of behavioral modification education, but with everything that was going on with COVID, that kind of got pushed back. So my degree is obviously going to be higher than people that would obviously just be maintaining like kennels, just because I work with the public.
Sorry, I wanted to stay muted for a minute. There was a semi truck going by. Thank you. So my next question is a little bit still along the lines of education. Most of these girls that are going to be watching this and are currently watching this are in like middle school or high school. So what in school were you really drawn to that kind of gave you the idea that you might want to go into this field? And then what advice do you have for the girls who right now who might be considering going into the field? Gianna, I know you were talking a lot about experience. So you started a little bit. Do you want to lead off?
Sure. I think in school for me, what kind of piqued my interest in finding the zoo world was, of course, I was taking anthropology classes. And my focus is actually biological anthropology. So we talk a lot about primates in that focus. So I had a class that was all about primatology and primate behavior, and learning a lot about behavior kind of piqued my interest into, okay, well, we can learn behaviors from animals that are primates that are very intelligent. What can we do with other things? So that kind of piqued my interest into, okay, what do zoos do? Because of a lot of what goes into a zoo is very kind of up in the air, and nobody really knows what zoos do and what goes on behind the scenes. It's all very mysterious. But doing it, it's like, oh, okay, we're just doing animal behavior, which is a great tool. It's a great thing to learn. So for me, I am doing a lot of learning on the job. We have a great curator who's new to us. He's been with us for about 1.5 years, and he's a falconer. So he's done falconry for most of his life. So he's raised birds of prey and done all sorts of macaw flight shows and things that it takes a very keen eye to learn behavior of birds. They're a very difficult animal to work with. So being able to learn from someone that they kind of went with the most difficult animal to work with and learn backwards is really nice. But I think definitely I've always been interested in animals. I've always loved them. I wanted to be a vet when I was a kid, and then other things kind of happen and, you know, different dreams come along. But here I am still at a zoo doing animal related things, which is really nice. So advice-wise, I definitely say, you know, stick to learning what you want to about animals. It's really nice to have that background, but then also that experience that you can get. Kind of volunteering anywhere is really nice. I did not have it coming in. It would have been really helpful to me to have had that volunteer experience and intern experience. Even if it was just, you know, walking dogs, it would have been more experience to have than having zero. Thankfully, I learned quick, but still, experience is a really nice thing to have.
I will say that I volunteered at a zoo when I was in middle school, and it was one of the coolest volunteering experiences I ever had. So if you have that opportunity, definitely go for it. It's super
You can't be afraid of poop, though.
Yeah.
Poop is everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Sammy, do you want to talk a little bit about what you were interested in high school that led you to this career or field, and then also what advice you have for the girls who will be watching and are watching?
Yes, so I actually grew up on a farm. We had baby cows, we had turkeys, chickens, pretty much everything you could possibly imagine. So loving animals from a very young age came natural to me. And then when I was in middle school, I actually started volunteering at our local shelter. I wasn't able to work with the dogs just because I was under the age of 18, but they let me work with the cats. I quickly became aware of how bad cat urine smells when they're not altered. So that was a real breaking point for me, and realizing how committed I was at such a young age. Also poop, I'll agree with you with poop. So basically in the animal world, if you're gonna get involved, you're gonna get dirty. I buy all my clothes from used clothes stores, except for my polos, which they order here for me. I seen you had one too. So like basically just the love for animals, you're gonna get dirty. It's a great thing when they learn to trust you and you're able to work with scared animals or animals that are not sure of people, and you're able to rehabilitate them. So I would just say any kind of volunteering experience or free webinars that you can watch or any kind of educational information that you can gather that's free. Education is key and it will keep your mind growing. So basically that's what I did, and that's how I got here.
Awesome, thank you. Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about your interest in high school, advice for the girls?
Sure. So pretty much how I ended up in the field is I knew I wanted to work with animals, but I didn't really want to go for the full 8 years that a veterinarian would go for. So that's why I ended up at LCC, just getting my gen eds done, figuring things out. And then luckily enough, Scranton isn't very far from me. So I realized that there was a local college that had veterinary technician, which is equivalent pretty much to a human nurse. So really, what I recommend for anyone who is looking into getting into the profession, if they are in high school, middle school even, definitely volunteering. I will 100% agree with that, just to get your feet wet, to see what it's really like in a practice, in a clinic, or wherever else, you want to go. The animal world is very welcoming for people to, come see what we do. I think it's so funny how we all relate on poop and pee. Because that's the truth. You can't be scared of that at all. But as far as your courses go, in high school, I would recommend that you go on a route that is science oriented, your biologies, anatomy, if it's available, math courses. I know math could sound a little scary, but you definitely have to have some footing in math and be willing to work at it if it is an area that you struggle in. So yeah, pretty much that's what I tell the students the probable students, they come in from high school, just to say, yeah, focus in on your science, your math, and then, you'll be ready to go, hopefully, for when you hit college.
Awesome, great advice. And I will echo, if you do a year at community college first, you will save a lot of money.
Oh, yes.
It's a good idea. If anyone tells you it's not a good idea, they're
nope,
wrong.
we say otherwise. Yeah.
Yep. So can each of you talk a little bit about what the common misconceptions are about the work that you do, and then what you do to combat those misconceptions? Sammy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So this is the most misunderstood thing. People think all I do at work all day is play with kitties and puppies, and that's not what I do. I deal with dogs that have interesting behavioral issues, and I focus on them and I work with them. I work with very strong dogs. So this job, you definitely have to be in shape, because when a 110-pound Cane Corso is ripping you around and you weigh 140 pounds, it's kind of a challenge. So just for the record, I don't play with kitties or puppies all day. So that's the main thing that people always think. And then when they actually sit down and talk to me and I give them a tour of our building and actually give them the rundown of what we do, and when kittens are under 2 pounds, like we can't even, or under a pound, we can't even vaccinate them because it could hurt them. So then we have to look into rescue partners. So we rely heavily on the community and our rescue networking to save a lot of animals that we're not able to physically keep here, because without vaccinating animals that aren't of weight, they could die from an upper respiratory and we would never have any idea what it was. So I think that's the main focus that I cannot drill enough into people's heads, is that it looks really good on the outside, but when you're nitty and gritty and actually getting dirty, it's more focused on the point of like rehabilitating animals. So that's something that everybody thinks is what I do.
Awesome, thanks, Sammy. Gianna, do you want to talk about misconceptions of your job?
Sure. So along the same lines as what Sammy said, I don't play with tiger cubs. That's just not what I do. And I think a lot of times people kind of think, oh, you work at the zoo. Oh, you work with big cats. Oh, you're going to bring me like a lion cub when you say outreach program. I'm not bringing you any baby animal ever. We do not take babies from moms unless it is medically necessary. So you are not getting a baby tiger. No, I'm not bringing you a baby gorilla. So that's definitely the hardest thing for me, is that we're constantly being like, oh, so you have baby animals? Oh, you're gonna bring me a baby? Like, no. I try and equate it to like, well, I wouldn't take a human baby from its mom and be like, here, you hold it now. So no, not doing that. And then also that, like, again, because we're a zoo, people kind of just assume that we take things from the wild. Definitely not. All of our animals are either captive bred, rescues, or animals that are from reputable breeders. So things like hedgehogs and guinea pigs, we're going to get from a breeder that's what they do. They have to go through lengths in order to be approved by a zoo, because we do need to make sure there's clean genetic lines, that we're not getting any sort of diseased animal. We want it to be healthy. All animals that are born within zoos are pretty much either traded with other zoos for more breeding opportunities, or we release them back into the wild, if that's the case with that specific species of animal. That is what we're doing with our Guam rails right now. So we're the first zoo to have an education Guam rail, which is an extinct in the wild bird. And we only could have him because he imprinted on a person, and therefore he couldn't be sent back to the wild. And he passed away a few years ago, but all of our other Guam rails so far have been bred here and sent back to the wild, that is what we do. So there's definitely that misconception that we take things. I'm not going out into the savannah and stealing a lion. It's just not what I'm gonna do. So yeah, a big misconception is that we take things. Not taking anything. It's all born and traded around so that we can continue on bloodlines for conservation.
And just a follow up, so the animals that are who are raised and then returned to the wild, are those raised differently? You said one was used for education, so how are they treated differently to prepare them for a living in the wild?
Yeah. So any of the animals that we're working on conservation efforts with to put them back in the wild, we make sure that they are reared by their parents. So we do call that parent reared. So we have kingfishers and rails that we breed right now, that are kind of getting ready to be put back into the wild. So they are raised by the parents. We do not intervene at all, unless we have to. And if we have to, then you are fully covered head to toe, not recognizable as a human, because otherwise, as we've learned with our GC, they will imprint on you. And then that's kind of it. They don't know how to be the animal that they are, which then defeats the purpose of doing it. So a little different from our education animals. We want them to know that we're people and that we are like their partners. But we still rely on other zoos to primarily breed those animals. And if it is one that the genetic line is kind of overflowing and they don't need that particular animal to breed, then that's when it's like, oh, well, that could be an education animal, because it's not like we can just let it go in the wild. It already kind of knows that humans are where the food comes from. One of our owls that is a rehab bird, she's been with us for over 30 years. She's a great horned owl. And we actually found her in Fairmount Park, and she was kind of begging for food from humans. So that kind of was an indicator to us that, oh, this animal definitely was hand raised by someone that thought that they could have an owl as a pet. You definitely can't. And so she was very malnourished. So the zoo brought her in and the vets did everything they had to, and we've had her for 30 years. So she's great.
Thank you. Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about misconceptions of your job?
Sure. There's a couple, but I will say a lot of it does correlate with how Sammy was saying of, oh, you know, you're just going to hold puppies and kittens all day. You know, that's really not, there's a ton more to it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's wonderful when we do get to interact with any animal, but there's definitely a lot more to it. And in saying that, Sammy, I give you all the credit in the world working at a shelter. That is very, very hard work and very emotionally tolling. So keep it going because you're like my hero. But as far as for the vet techs, you know, a lot of people will consider us almost as like an assistant to the vet where we just restrain. But really we have a lot of responsibilities. You know, we could be running anesthesia, we could be doing, you know, blood draws, lab work, critical care, you know, anything in the pharmacy. And then we could be cleaning up poop in a kennel, you know, so we really go to both extremes. Another thing is, you know, people assume that we make a lot of money. Unfortunately, we do not, whether or not you have schooling or different things. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. If you are looking into this type of career, that's what I want to say. The next thing I would say would be that as a vet tech, you, at least in school, you will work with like a multitude of species. At Johnson, we'll start with, you know, you may be working with a mouse one semester, and then you're working with a horse or a cow the next semester. And even if you're not interested in getting into large animal medicine, or lab animal medicine is what they call it, with like, I also call that like exotic pet medicine, as far as mice, rats, rabbits. You know, you still have to study all that in order to pass your boards. So we definitely focus on dogs and cats, but you can go other places. Some people have questions where they're like, I want to be a vet tech, but I want to work in a zoo. I think sometimes I like to put it out there, and probably Gianna's better at answering this question, as far as like, maybe you're more interested in being a zookeeper or doing what Gianna does. And then wildlife, again, that's kind of in her realm. But you definitely can be a vet tech and work there, but it's just a little bit harder to get into. And then also, you know, there's always that misconception of like, I don't want to work with people. Unfortunately, there's always a person at the end of the leash or carrying in the carrier. Sometimes if I work in the back, or when I used to work in the back, I'd be like, oh, taxi's here, you know, and then I'd hand it off to the receptionist who would then, you know, interact with the client. But there is actually a lot of good interaction that can happen with people and their animals. So I do like to put that out there, though, that you're just not going to be working with the animals. You will be doing a lot of client education and interaction with humans.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think we've learned through these career chats that communication skills are important in pretty much every field you can imagine, even if you wouldn't think so. So I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. First question is, what effect has technology and, you know, the advancement of technology made on or had on your field? And, you know, including coronavirus. Sammy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So Zoom meetings are the new in thing, obviously, due to COVID. I would say, honestly, with technology, it basically comes down to different equipment and safety measures that we use. We use a lot of blowhorns here for, everybody that goes out with a dog. It's a requirement to have one, because in that way, if there was an issue, obviously somebody would hear that person and can assist if there was like an animal attack or a dog bite or anything amongst those lines. Walkie-talkies, they're a phenomenal way of communication. We have about a 1/4-mile walking trail on our property that's all like high brush, and you can't see to the other side of the pine trees that like line the edge of the woods. So walkie-talkies definitely come into play. Cell phones in general, obviously, is a good thing to have on you all the time. And as far as that goes, other than emails and like stuff like that, obviously daily check-ins and whatnot, but just, I don't know, COVID, it's weird because working in the shelter, we still get animals and we still have them and we'll always have them. And if it wasn't for people, we wouldn't have them. So I thank people for that aspect. But nothing has really changed significantly because we're still here and we're still doing everything and just trying to maintain, the proper procedures of like social distancing, just so we are able to come to work and do these sort of things. So I guess like the Zoom meetings right now are just my favorite thing about the technology upgrade, because we can still communicate and do things like this, obviously, to help educate people. So.
Awesome, thank you. Gianna, do you want to talk about how technology's impacted your field and how you use technology in your job?
Sure. So a lot of what Sammy said is a lot of what we do. We all, of course, have radios, walkie-talkies, kind of the normal like animal in a big area things to have so that we can get to one another in an emergency. We all have kind of a basic zoo radio, and then each animal section has their own set of smaller radios or their own channel. So I'm in the kids zoo section, so I have a kids zoo radio and a big zoo radio, just in case we need to call over for anything. And then really the Zoom meetings have been nonstop. But in my average day-to-day education job, we're constantly meeting anyway, because of course you learn more by talking to other people. So having communication is really important. But as far as what I typically do with the animals, everything's kind of the same. I still have to train. I still have to do animal behavior. I still have to do husbandry. They still got to eat. I'm still chopping carrots and grapes every day. So nothing too much has changed animal-wise. But education-wise, while we were closed, we started kind of virtual programs and kind of walking around the zoo and having programs for kids that were just stuck at home, and their teachers were like, please, we need our kids to learn something. And now we're back open at partial capacity. So we're trying to figure out what we can do with technology that's still going to be outreach, but without having to walk around in the zoo campus with all of our guests that are there. So working on something there, but other than that, the technology COVID mashup has been an interesting one to work through at a zoo where you still need, basic tools, but technology is here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Gianna. Amanda, do you want to talk about how you use technology in your field?
Sure. I guess to start, beside all the COVID and everything, in the field on a regular day-to-day basis, I mean, technology in the veterinary world, we have made like leaps and bounds. Just our different types of diagnostic equipment that we have, digital x-ray, we could go into different types of surgical instruments, and there's just so much heart monitoring. There was recently actually a friend of mine whose dog got a pacemaker put in, after having some heart issues. So ultrasounds, I could go on and on, but yeah, technology definitely plays a big part in the vet tech world and veterinary world. And it's kind of speeding up, like when I went to school, there's some things I'm teaching now that I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never touched one of those. And the students are like, oh yeah, we do it every day. And it's like, oh, okay. So a lot of change. As far as COVID goes in practice right now in technology, there's a lot of conversation over the phone just to get patient history and such, and a lot of, say, refills or virtual type of appointments for patients that don't necessarily need to be seen right then. And then also I would say for my teaching, we went from a completely on-campus learning environment to almost completely remote. Other than the hands-on skills, we will meet for those because our major organization, in order to pass the program, we do have to get those done and signed off to make sure that the students are ready to perform these tasks in the field. But really now that's really what we're going off of, is a lot of remote learning. So
Yeah, thank you. So I lied. I think we're actually up on time, so that will be our last question. Thank you so much for being on this call today. I'm sure that the girls learned a lot. I know I learned a ton. And like I said, we will be sharing a recording out with our membership so even more people can learn. If you want to share any kind of social media or websites with us that we can share with the recording, feel free to email them to Nicole, Liz, or me. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you again so much, and I hope that everybody has a great evening.
Bye.
Thanks.
yep, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.